Kia ora tātou, ko Penigan te mai Tapu, ko Malamtan te moana, ko Yorkshire te mai iwi, ko Skipton te mai hapu. So I'm a long way from home. My connection with planet Earth is actually way back in England, so I feel very privileged to actually be standing here at the first TEDx at MIT. I am actually a student here, completing an MBA through Southern Cross University, which is supported by MIT, so I'm a student here as well. So as a sustainability professional, one of the things that I really struggle with, thank you very much, is actually explaining to people what I do. In the corporate world, I can stand up and I say, oh, well, I look at the social, economic and environmental performance of Auckland Airport and I compare it and benchmark ourselves against other international airports and other NZX 50 companies. And to a corporate audience, that's fine, but when I talk like that to the general public, I kind of lose people somewhere between the words social and environmental. So for my presentation today, I've put together a few slides and some very simple pictures that I can hopefully use to explain what I believe sustainability is and how important I believe it is to actually the changing face of Manukau as a local resident, as somebody who's employed here, and hopefully pass on some messages to the future generations of Manukau. One thing that we can all do, and you can Google this later hopefully, is actually calculate our ecological footprint. So you can go online, you can Google it, and you can fill out a very simple calculator. It asks you about your lifestyle, the size of your house, how many cars you have, whether you recycle your waste, how many international holidays you have each year. And it comes up with a number, and the number is the number of planets you actually need to support your lifestyle. And I did this a couple of weeks ago, just out of interest, and it actually came up with 1.2 planets. And that's, for me, a sustainability professional. I was like, ooh, that's not good. But if I was living in America, I'd actually need 3 to 4 planets to sustain my lifestyle. So actually, where you're born has a huge influence on your ecological footprint. And I kind of pondered on that because it basically means when you're born, you actually don't have a lot of opportunity to change that ecological footprint. So it's important for us as leaders in this area, in a city that is developing and developing rapidly, that we actually take some responsibility for that ecological footprint of future generations. So come with me, if you will, to the Amazon rainforest. Close to the border between Venezuela and Brazil. This image, there's a couple of images that Survival International put up recently, which really captured my attention. This is the Yanomami Tribe. They live in the Amazon rainforest, and essentially they are totally connected with a natural ecosystem. They don't need planetary boundaries. They actually get everything they need from the Amazon rainforest. That particular hapu or sub-tribe, there are 17 families in that sub-tribe, and they're building a communal shelter there. Their social structure is very simple. The women tend the gardens, 80% of the food they grow themselves, and the men go out hunting and provide the other 20%. They've got younger generations that actually look up to and respect the older generations. And they've got shaman who are in touch with the spiritual side of the rainforest as well. So they understand Kaitiakitanga, they understand Whakapapa. They're inextricably linked to their ecosystem, and they know if they overexploit a certain element of that ecosystem, take too much resource out of it, it will have a negative impact on their existence. I look at this picture and I think, what must they be thinking? They're being buzzed by this light aircraft or helicopter or whatever it is. What they're not thinking is the men would not be turning to the women and saying, I think we could do with one of those for the weekend, darling. The women wouldn't be turning to the men and thinking, oh, at last, it's a rock star or a film star. They've come to take one of our children to live in the United States of America. How fantastic. The planet is not going to be saved by celebrity or celebrity endorsement, but we can learn a lot from this very, very simple existence. Let's contrast it with the other extreme. This is Tokyo. And depending where you draw the boundary, the metropolitan boundary, there are 38 million people in this city. In its densest part, there are 20,000 people per square kilometre. So this is the other extreme of existence that we've created for ourselves on this planet. And I look at that picture and I think, yes, we've got increasing urbanisation. That is going to happen. We've got increasing global population. In fact, between now 2017 and 2030, there are going to be an extra 1.1 billion people living in urban areas. So the cities are going to absorb this increasing population. That has its advantages because we can provide the infrastructure so they can actually live their lives. But when you think about it in terms of Whanau and Whakapapa, you've got to think, how can those people be connected to the natural environment? They don't have to think about going out and hunting their food. They don't even have to think about how to prepare it. It's there, pre-packaged, ready, with the instructions on how to cook it. So if we're born into that sort of existence, it's a very, very different impression we have of the planet and what we need to do to save it. And I know Gus was intrigued by the title of my presentation. We don't have to save the planet. Well, we don't. We know the planet will endure whatever mess we make of it. It'll still be around in another however many billion years. But we have a responsibility to actually treat it a little bit better than we are at the moment. The other thing about living in a city like that is if you're born into that sort of environment, then your existence will be digitized. You'll be stored as a series of data points in data warehouses. People will be able to interrogate that, whether it's education, whether it's government, whether it's scientists, or unfortunately marketeers. But there can be advantages to that digitization. This is a map showing the impact of consumerism, the supply chain to consumers in Japan, not just Tokyo, but the whole of Japan. And some scientists have taken this information and they've looked at the whole of the supply chain and the impact it is having on terrestrial and marine endangered species. And they've done it for every country in the world. And I think that is just incredible. We can understand the impact. This is just ecological impacts. But surely we can do the same thing around social impacts as well. We can visualize the impact that we're actually having on the planet. But the question is, what do we do with this information? Makes fantastic reading, fantastic scientific journal type articles, but what do we do with it then? Who takes responsibility for this? How do we get this message across to the next generation? How do we get it across to consumers? Are we actually going to tackle the organizations involved in that supply chain? Where on earth do we start? So I've come up with an idea. We could actually start labeling things. I'm not sure this particular wording would go down too well. But essentially, we're all planet wreckers. Without us actually knowing it, we don't consciously make decisions when we go out and buy food or clothes for our children. And it's certainly not in the fine detail and the small print on the labels of the things that we're actually consuming. But we need something to get us over this hurdle and say, actually, yes, we are all planet wreckers. So let's admit that. And let's just move on and think about how we can change our behavior and actually improve the situation. This slogan has been around for a long time. Thinking global, and acting local. And as I've already said, it's very difficult for consumers to think globally when they're more concerned, actually, as we've heard today, about keeping a roof over their head, being able to afford shelter and accommodation, and to feed their children, and to get them well educated. And the thought processes are all about the economic side of things. How can we actually afford to live in the society that we've created? And we don't really have time to think about the environmental and social impacts. But collaborative action has had some dramatic effects. 30 years ago, in the environmental space, somebody realized there was a hole appearing in the ozone layer. And the scientists looked at it and found that the source of the issue was actually in the propellant gas used in aerosol cans. So everybody's busy using deodorant, not knowing that they're actually creating a hole in the ozone layer. Chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, were the chemicals involved. And the United Nations got the top scientists together and they came up with the Montreal Protocol. It was signed 30 years ago by the majority of the countries in the United Nations. And CFCs, or the use of CFCs in aerosols, was banned. And it happened almost overnight. And it was effective. The hole in the ozone layer has shrunk. Why was that so effective? When you compare that to what's happened around climate change, and everybody's been talking about greenhouse gas emissions and reducing carbon footprints, but we're really kind of struggling to come up with a solution that everybody can agree on. We've had a Kyoto Protocol, we've had a Paris Agreement, we've had a Marrakesh Accord, but we're still not getting traction. And I think the simple reason is, with the case of CFCs, there was a simple and easy alternative that didn't cost any more. So the manufacturers could literally move over to an alternative chemical, had the same properties, didn't cost them anything. When you look at the issues around climate change, we're talking about the use of fossil fuels and liquid fossil fuels, and it means significant change. The alternatives are there, but at the moment they're more expensive. There is resistance to moving over towards renewables. They're getting this idea that they're not as reliable. But if we take the example of the Montreal Protocol, then we know that collaborative effort can achieve fantastic results. So what do we want in terms of the future for Manukau? It's got to be somewhere in between these two extremes of existence. And I think we've got an opportunity here because, yes, we know Manukau's developing and it's developing rapidly, but we still have an opportunity to influence that development and hopefully make it more sustainable. Not take it to the extreme that we see in Tokyo and remove people totally from the natural environment. And I'm a local. And I love the fact that I can go over to the East Coast and I can go into the Whanau Ranges, or I can go out west to the Waitakaris. And I can experience that natural environment and I can take my kids and they can appreciate it as well. And I think we need to build more of that into the curriculums at educational establishments so that we actually teach people that holistic view across all subjects. Let me finish with some examples of effective collaboration out at the airport. Let me start with ARA. ARA is our airport jobs and skills hub. I was involved, I was the airport representative on workshops involving central government, local government, the educational sector, trades training people, the local community. And we knew we had to do something around the construction that was going on out at the airport. Significant construction is going to happen out there for the next 5 to 10 years. So how can we use that to improve the situation for the local community? And ARA came up with a very simple vision: sustainable employment. And that's all we needed to get everybody around the table on the same page. The statistics that I have around ARA is that it's employed 120 people. This was October last year, so it's a little bit out of date, I apologise. So that's 120 people employed from South Auckland, and over, excuse me, over 60 of those are no longer drawing social welfare benefits. So the long-term effect of that on the community in South Auckland, I don't think we've fully realised yet. But doors have been opened for probably about 18 months, and they'll continue to remain open and have a really positive impact here in South Auckland. The two vehicles in the middle, back to climate change, the bus is a hybrid Volvo. It runs on 40% less diesel. 30% of the journey between the park and ride, car park and the terminals is actually on electric motors, reducing pollution. We trialled it, we're hoping to get some in the fleet. The plug-in hybrid, we've got 3 of these in our vehicle fleet now. So we are moving to reduce our own carbon emissions and set an example for other corporates. The picture of me out on the tarmac, it's one of the advantages of working out at the airport. You can go and get some really cool shots of yourself surrounded by big aeroplanes. This is me with Tony Phillips from OCS, who are a cleaning and waste contractor, and Doug Farr from the Ministry of Primary Industries. We've been collaborating for a number of years to improve waste recovery and recycling. In the international terminal in 2012, we were probably only recovering and recycling about 12% of the waste that was being generated there. The latest figure is actually 47% last year. It's gone up to 47%. All those initiatives are reducing our carbon footprint, and we are CMAR certified, so we get externally audited and verified around that. So the success factors that we've had, which I think we can use here, is to actually create a shared vision of the future face of Manukau. What do we actually want it to look like? Where in those two extremes is it going to fit? How do we actually measure that? And we need to have agreed indicators across social, environmental, and economic areas. We certainly need collective action. No individual or individual business can actually do it alone. We need to measure and manage, and above all, we need to review what we're doing and celebrate every single success along the way. Thank you.